a conflict among 7th grade young ladies. Everything I tried to do traditionally, meet with kids and their parents. I tried all sorts of things to separate kids. This problem not only occurred at the school, but also occurred in the community. All the traditional things that I had done as an administrator were having no effect. In fact, it was getting worse. It grew to dominate every day of our life at that school. I did not know what else to do. Community conferencing sent, I think, at least 3 facilitators, and I literally had 25 students that I was referring and their parent. The onion of the relationships in the story gets peeled back layer by layer by layer, until the point that the truth emerges in front of everyone. The very next day, the whole climate in my building felt different because these young ladies were no longer in conflict. Like, it was done. We reduced the violence in our school by, it was like 93% in about 18 months.
What we're looking to do is shift culture. And when you're talking about shifting culture, you're talking about shifting all levels of the school. You're shifting the way that you speak. You're shifting the way that you interact. You might even shift the way that you teach.
Teaching is not just learning how to teach quadratic equations and a 5-paragraph essay. It's like, how do you relate to teenagers and how do you help them grow up? This is not just a discipline thing, fix the kids. It's like, how do we change all the social relations of everyone in the school so that everyone treats each other with respect?
RJ comes from indigenous values and practices. That's one of the reasons why it's so different than what we're used to in society.
Some people start with really difficult situations. So there's a big bad fight, or there's been some kind of crisis that involves a lot of people. Other people have taken a more systematic approach where they start with the elementary school, or they start with the middle school.
We had a teacher study group. We had 2 people who had dedicated time in their day to do the coordinating. We had trainings for parents. We had trainings for students. So it wasn't really until we had all those different pieces that I feel like there was any major shift.
I've got 25 schools, and 18 of them are high suspension schools. And then 7 of them have been doing restorative justice on their own. But those schools, they're like my mentor schools.
When we first started, it was with schools that sort of had some people that had been trained, and then maybe the principal had been trained. They kind of wanted to do it, and we slowly kind of brought it in organically. But then all of a sudden we got this influx of money, and we were able to hire people and place them at sites. And there are some schools that got RJ people, RJ facilitators, that there was really not much buy-in at all, or none. And the principal maybe didn't know what it was, and so that makes it very difficult.
Restorative practices is built upon the idea that people choose to do them. And if you take that to scale in a school, how do you get, all of the teachers and all of the staff and all of the family members and all of the students to choose to want to do this? I think it's perfectly legitimate to require staff, for instance, to go to some introductory workshops about restorative justice so that they can then have enough information to choose. What I have come to do, because I do introductory workshops to large groups of people, is to ask for the gymnasium and enough chairs for everybody who comes to the workshop. I give a basic explanation of what a circle process is and how a talking piece works. They get a script then that gives them an opening and a closing, and takes them through an introductory round and a storytelling round and addressing issues round and a making plans, coming to unity round, and then a closing. And then I have people count off, and they go off to their circles of 8.
We work with the early adopters first. The people who resonate with it, who want to do it, we train them, we support them, and then we'll build relationships with the rest.
You don't do it in any school where the principal is not bought in, because you'll be wasting your time and money.
We try to get the admin on board, and I mean, there's still principals in this district that have not been trained in restorative justice. The ones that have been and that are there consistently at the site for more than a couple years, that's where the schools do well.
What teachers and many people hear at first is restorative practices means that we're not disciplining students.
To have restorative practices work, you can't just be entirely permissive.
If you're true to restoration, that doesn't mean that you don't have a consequence, but that the nature of the consequence changes. I had a young lady who she graffitied the dentist office across the street from the school. I facilitate a restorative conversation between her and the dentist. The student has to own what she did. He gets a chance to actually see who the culprit is and see that this is a teenage kid. And I would say to the student, so, okay, so we've restored, and I use those words, so we've restored our relationship with the dentist, right? How do you make this right? And so she came up with, like, I guess I need to get rid of the graffiti. And I said, that sounds about right to me.
I think that just having that balance between traditional and restorative is important too, especially when you're talking about teachers feeling supported.
When you first start RJ, it's confusing, it's dissonant. Some kids are getting restorative, some are getting non-restorative. Some teachers are doing circles, other teachers aren't doing circles. People are like, what's happening? Wait, are we doing restorative justice or are we not? And it's like, well, actually, you're doing both right now because you're just starting and that's where you're at.
If you're thinking that the restorative practices are for the kids, you actually are undermining what you're doing.
If a teacher sends somebody down and the teacher was the person who sent the person down because the teacher was frustrated and was harmed by that student, that the teacher and the student are going to be in a restorative process. The student is not going to go to the restorative room and be struck with a magic wand.
If you fail to give them each that opportunity, that restorative dialogue doesn't work. And that I think classically is where we fall short as administrators because of the dynamic nature of a school environment and very limited opportunity to process with the adult, right? Because the adult's got a classroom full of kids.
Now I can even think about how do I utilize restorative culture with my colleagues, with my colleagues.
It was very hard to get things started, especially when we had everyone was full-time teaching, a lot of people were teaching fellows, to get people there, to have a teacher study group, to talk about restorative practices, to vote in through our union a position that was part-time coordinating, to familiarize the staff and the young people with the principles of restorative justice and to try to get anything done. I mean, like, it was years.
I think if a school is fully on board and ready to go, I think you can do a massive amount of work in 3 years, and especially if a principal is really down to do this. But most schools take 2 years to even realize what restorative justice is.
I think sometimes we rush so much in education because you can't force people to be restorative. It's something that they have to come to, and it's something that they also have to practice. Just being able to look at what you're doing, admit what's not working, and then shift. Like, it's really simple, but for some reason, sometimes it's hard.
It's like when you have a fallow field and nothing has been growing on it but weeds for a while. You have to do a lot of work to slowly bring that soil back. You just can't go in and plow it and then hope that you're going to make a really strong micro culture in the soil.
Some people are already on board because they're already there. They already have that restorative mindset. Other people don't have that particular mindset. The approach to quote-unquote discipline is completely different, and so folks need time to adjust, and some never will, and that's okay too. In some schools, some people have just had to find other placements.
It's such a big thing to move a school from what education has been doing for the past 150 years to where we're trying to get. This means I have to embrace a whole philosophy and a way of being. It's not just like a thing I can do. It's not just something that the RJ person does. Yeah.
Sure, restorative practices is a technique, but if you implement it as a technique, it won't have sustaining power.
Teachers who were resistant would, of course, push back with, I'm losing instructional time. And I said, are you really? Because what happens? There's a conflict in the cafeteria that rolls down the hall, it rolls into your classroom, then you end up spending 20 minutes trying to get the kids settled down and focused. You didn't have that instructional time anyway.
It's really the teachers that have to believe that we can change.
Because sometimes teachers will say, oh, restorative practices, that's going to be gone in however long.
The thing that I find the hardest is working with the principals, because they have so much academic pressure, and even that it's like they can't put enough time and energy and redo their structure unless you get through to them that if you want your academics to take off, get a nice social emotional basis here so everyone feels calm, so the school is safe.
The whole idea is you spend a bunch of years, you put those systems in place, and then no matter who's there, the systems are there. And it's not personality dependent. But what a lot of people didn't realize, and what it took me to experience this to realize, is that when a new principal comes in, they bring in new systems.
In less than 8 years, I had 4 different principals and 9 different assistant principals. When you have a school full of 22-year-old teachers who are not from the place that we're teaching, we had constant turnover. Constant teacher turnover, and so it would mean that we would get going. We would Teachers Unite would do a training. 8 of us would go to the training about restorative practices, and then we would come back, and 3 people would be there the next year.
Here's what I notice about schools that have strong culture. I notice that there's not a lot of fluctuation in leadership and even in staff. I'm not saying it's impossible, but I'm saying that what can help restorative practices is consistency.
We know it works, but how do we prove that to other people, right?
So now people create sheets, and you just answered the question, right, about restorative practices.
The practitioners that I know say that things go wrong when you haven't followed the basic steps.
You have teachers saying, I had a restorative conversation with them, and they just meant, I tried to talk to them,
Are they actually doing those community building practices in the classroom on a regular basis like you all agreed to? Those are very important things to measure before you ever measure whether or not your suspensions have gone up or down or sideways, because lots of things affect the behavior of students.
There were times I felt pressure from my higher administration to kind of, well, if this is what you say you want your teachers to do, then you have to force them to do it, or that sort of compliance. And I held to my belief, which was this is ultimately about changing the way we engage students. This is not about a compliance factor. That will destroy this.
It isn't, in most cases, there isn't really anything to restore. When were schools good? Schools have always been oppressive, the way that they've never served everyone.
15% of our demographic is represented by African American children. However, they represent about 35% of the suspensions at that level.
Some communities in the United States have deep distrust of all kinds of institutions, including school. And changing that relationship is not going to happen just because you instituted restorative practices for a year.
There's the cultural after effects of slavery that we've never dealt with in our country, in terms of healing and reconciliation. We all are traumatized in our and not functioning well.
It's about using some of these practices and protocols to shift power, to listen to new voices, or to listen to voices that in dominant society are being silenced or marginalized.
This approach, I think, because it is about our common humanity, gives us some of the ability to recognize that and to know that it's going to take time for me to be able to build that bridge back, so that a person who in their family has that legacy can walk into a school and feel like it's pretty comfortable.
Equity and trauma-informed practices are two must-be the lenses we do everything through, and that's from the top down.